Hello, welcome to today's immigration tidbit. So today we're going to talk a bit about nurses coming to the U.S. and how nurses can immigrate and the typical and different paths that nurses can take. Now, first of all, you have to understand that nurses can work in different environments. They don't just work at hospitals. That's not the only place. They can work at clinics. They can work at home health cares. They can be on call. They can come to your home. Anywhere that a registered nurse will be what we're talking about and where they can immigrate. So when a nurse is looking for a petitioner, it can be, of course, the hospital. It can be a home health care agency. It can be an individual who needs an RN. There's a variety of different types of petitioners. It's not just one path. And what we're talking about here are RNs, okay? Not LVNs, not nurse assistants, because those are all different types of petitions. We're talking only about ones that become RNs, okay, registered nurses, okay? So the healthcare system, of course, in the United States needs nurses, okay? And it is appropriate for there to be a separate section just for nurses because of the high demand that exists in the U.S. for the nurses. So I'm going to go over the procedures, the paths, the types of immigration documents and things that would be needed in order to properly have an immigrant come here to the U.S. as a nurse. Now, normally when someone does an employment petition, because that's what we're talking about here, except it's for a registered nurse, normally they have to apply for what's called the PERM, okay? And the PERM, it does take a long time. It's a process that the whole purpose of it is to show there are no available U.S. workers for that particular position. However, there are certain fields that the United States government has automatically said that there is a shortage and that there is no need to do a PERM, which again is the normal first petition to go forward in an employment petition. And one of those fields are nurses. So if you're going to be petitioned as an RN, you can skip right past the PERM because you are in what is known as a Schedule A category, okay, where it has already been determined there is a shortage, and essentially the PERM is pre-certified, so you don't have to worry about going through that whole process. And that is a very big and significant benefit if you want to come as an RN. Believe me, anybody who's gone through the PERM process will know that it is laborious. It takes a while. There are tons and tons of different steps that have to be done. And if you could skip it, you would in a heartbeat. Okay? So that's the first thing. Now, the benefits of having nurses skip the PERM process and come in without having to go through that, of course, benefits everybody. Because there's a decrease and a need for more nurses, it should be easier. And easier might not be the word, but faster to get in than a regular employment petition. Now, keep in mind that just because it does pass the PERM process, that doesn't mean that it automatically comes in as a registered nurse and that everything is automatically available. It still has to go through the visa waiting chart. So it still falls under what's called an EB3 petition. Okay? The EB3 petition is an employment-based petition, and depending what country you're from, there still could be a backlog. So even though the EB3 doesn't need the perm with a nurse petition, you might still have to wait years for the visa to become current, depending what country you're from. Okay, so you do need to check that chart, and you do need to make sure that the petitioner is willing to wait if the visa number is not current. Okay, so what do you do if the visa number is not current and you're being petitioned for the registered nurse petition to come in as a lawful permanent resident? Well, there may be an opportunity to come on a non-immigrant visa depending on the situation. Now, there are what is known as H-1Bs, and typically an H-1B requires a bachelor's degree, and the position typically has to require the use of the bachelor's degree. Now, a normal RN cannot really come in on an H-1B. There's lots of cases on this, and it is essentially shown that the H-1B is not available for normal nurses, because even though an RN, a registered nurse, normally has a BSN, which is a bachelor's of nursing, they say in reality you don't really need a bachelor's of nursing in order to get the RN. So why do I bring the H-1B up? Well, I bring it up because if you happen to be in a specialized area of nursing that requires more than the RN does, you might very well be eligible for the H-1B, such as if you're a pediatric nurse, or if you are in the ICU, working different areas, and you're specialized in some manner, then you can try coming in on the H-1B. There is also what is known as the H-2B, and that is a temporary visa. So let's say, for example, some older man, let's say, broke his hip, and he needs to have an RN, 24/7 for 6 months to make sure he can get around, to help him to do everything an RN would do. Then he could theoretically petition that nurse on an H-2B in order to come in for that temporary need. Okay, so those are the ways. Now, let's say that you happen to be, you being the RN who wants to come in, you happen to be from Canada or Mexico. Well, if you're a citizen of either of those countries, then you can come in on what is known as the TN visa. Okay, and of course these are all temporary, but the TN visa, normally you can get 3 years and you can renew it again. And essentially, if you come in on the TN and then later decide you want to be petitioned for the green card, then while there's sufficient time on the TN, you could then be petitioned for the RN for the green card, so that there's less time of actually waiting outside in order to come in. Okay, so that's the essential overview of the types of petitions that can come in. Now, there's a couple of agencies that you need to be aware of if you're going to be an RN. One is the CGFNS, and they are the ones that essentially will certify the nurse coming into the U.S. Now, a lot of nurses that have taken the the degree and so forth, they haven't passed the NCLEX, and the NCLEX is what is inside the United States in order for that person to be a licensed nurse. So the question is, how can you come into the United States being petitioned as an RN, as a registered nurse, if you technically are not a registered nurse yet? Okay, that's where the CGFNS comes in. The CGFNS does all of its testing and its evaluations, its credential evaluations, and essentially after you go through everything that is required by the CGFNS, essentially their statement is that number one, you've passed the TOEFL, the English requirements, and you've done everything so that it is very likely that when you come into the U.S. that you will pass the NCLEX and you will be able to get licensed. If you do come in and you don't pass, that's a whole different issue. But the statistical probability of passing, if you make it through everything that CGFNS tells you to, is that you're going to pass. And then you would, everything goes forward. You would come in the U.S., pass, become the RN, and then start working under the RN petition. Okay, so you have to understand procedurally what needs to be done, and you need to work with the CGFNS in order to successfully come in. So the way of coming in as a nurse then is the I-140 petition is initially done. And the I-140 petition, again, doesn't have to have the perm. You have all the supporting documents. There's lots of documents from the CGFNS and the TOEFL and everything showing that you're qualified to come in. And then what will happen is you will, if everything goes well, after the I-140 is done, then assuming you're outside the U.S., you would go through consulate processing, okay? In whatever country you happen to be in, the consulate processing is the procedure where you are going through the final steps in order to actually come in as a lawful permanent resident. If you're inside the U.S. and you're in status, and minus some other exceptions, you can adjust status for the same procedure, basically the same goal is to get the green card as a lawful permanent resident. Now, the nice thing about this is if you're married, then your spouse can come as a dependent, okay? So your spouse doesn't have to qualify for anything and can come in as a dependent and get his or her green card as well. If you have children that are under 21 and unmarried, they are also dependents. So, for example, if you have, the nurse petition that you get approved and everything goes through, and you have a spouse and 4 kids, then you, the spouse, and 4 kids all can come in as lawful permanent residents. The kids, depending how old they are, they will probably fall under the Child Citizenship Act relatively shortly and then become U.S. citizens. So it is a very good procedure to come in along with the dependents and the derivatives. And the bottom line here is that the nurse petitions, even though they take longer than they used to, if we're talking what they used to take back in the 1960s, they could start a petition and be here in 3 months with the green card. Okay, so things have changed a bit from then. But again, assuming the backlog is not very large, you could be here, relatively speaking, within a year to a year and a half. If everything goes through smoothly along with your family. And if you do have to wait, then remember there are the non-immigrant visa options that allow you to come in sooner, and then once you are here working as an RN, you can petition. And in some respects that might be easier because you can come in on the H-2B or the TN and then make sure, of course, the NCLEX is passed, and then it's easier actually for the I-140 to go through once that would be done. So that, in essence, is a summary of the nurse petition, how to do it, the documents and so forth required, and the procedures available. Okay.